Hey, how's life? This is The Last Coffee House, and this time we are talking about kind of a difficult area to discuss. This particular article is called Spain to Introduce Yes Means Yes Sexual Consent Law, end quote. So that's the title of the article. This is specifically about a law that's going into effect in Spain that's very recent. Very recent. This is the year 2018. Anno Domini, in case you're wondering. So the article explains that this particular law is it's aimed at removing ambiguity when it comes to consent in sexual encounters. As further explained, yes means yes, and anything else, including silence, means no. That is a huge, massive area to be discussing in this context. So there's something called an implied contract. When two people act as if they're in accordance with a contract, then you imply a contract. It looks as though they're acting in accordance with terms of a contract. So the contract is implied and both are bound by that contract. So in this particular case, on the face of it, it seems to suggest that somebody, if they don't explicitly say yes, it's literally anything else, anything other than the conduct of saying yes, is considered non-consent. It's considered a trigger to a rape conviction. Not a rape allegation, a rape conviction. So you have this one little category. And as a lawyer, it is terrifying to think about how this can be interpreted, especially over the entirety of Spain and being applied over in how many different courts all over. I don't know how the court system is structured in Spain, but in every possible iteration of circumstances, it is shocking to think that there's one conduct that is explicitly okay, everything else is not, and leads to an automatic rape conviction. And on the face of it, the way this language is written, it suggests that literally it's just the word yes. So if you're engaged in sexual congress and somebody grabbed the genitalia of the other person and then it led to sex, and then the person who did the grabbing of the genitalia said, no, I wasn't giving my consent, I was just grabbing genitalia, then it suggests that that is actually non-consent, and that would be rape thereafter. So this particularly stems from a rape case that occurred in Spain that caused public outrage, and of course a lot of these kinds of laws come from just initial inflamed public outrage from the result of one particular circumstance in one particular context at one particular time. And I looked it up. There are 46 million people in Spain. That's what Google told me anyway. 46 million people. Now it's about half and half male and female, and obviously you could take out the ones that aren't eligible or biologically capable of sex at this point, but that's a hell of a lot of people that are interacting that could potentially be engaged in something approximating sex or leading up to or whatever else that this particular statute would apply to. And yet, it's this one particular circumstance. This is the thing that was the catalyst for changing law that would apply to 46 million people, is one circumstance that involved like a handful of people. So in the particular case, and I didn't read the particular case, I'm not especially keen on finding out details of these kinds of situations. But the judges, there are a couple of comments from judges that said that in the video, the woman seemed passive. She wasn't explicitly decrying the act, but she seemed passive, and the fact that she seemed passive for an extended period of time suggested to these particular judges in this particular context, or this particular day, under this particular set of laws, that it wasn't rape, that they considered it wasn't enough. Not only that, but I wonder if Spain has a similar higher burden to demonstrate that there was criminal conduct, rather than saying like 50-50 for a civil case or something like that. So, or 51-49. But whatever the case, the judges believed, and who knows if these judges did a good job or were correct or were accurate. I know there are further appeals that are coming from this case, so who knows if it'll be upheld or if these particular judges are just wacky. But whatever the case, it was this one case that spawned a law that led to this yes means yes structure, statutory structure. One other quote, if a woman does not expressly say yes, then everything else is no, end quote. That's from Spain's Deputy Prime Minister and Equality Minister, who introduced the law, apparently. If a woman does not expressly say yes, then everything else is no. So you have to wonder, is there any subjectivity in it? Can they use a synonym? If the body language suggests otherwise, that's not sufficient. That it seems to say that they have to expressly say yes. Body language isn't enough. Using a synonym isn't enough. Dirty talk isn't enough. Explicit sexual activity, sexual action, an actual sexual act would not be sufficient under the terms we see here to justify engaging in full sexual congress. So anything else would be considered rape under the statute. And you wonder how long that lasts? I mean, already, obviously, consent is a very difficult thing, and you don't often have, like in this particular case, you had a video. You don't often have that. You just have two people competing on what was said, the interpretations of what was said, or whatever else. So in this particular case, you wonder if yes can only be the thing that means yes. Is that what this statute is trying to establish and what this statute is trying to mean? I mean, obviously there are going to be ramifications long term when it comes to intimacy and that sort of thing, when it's dragging sexuality and the kind of rapture and engagement and compulsivity and that sort of thing that often comes with sexuality. When you're dragging that, just kicking and screaming into all the sexiness of contract law, that's going to have long-term ramifications, but whatever, leaving that aside for now. It's just the actual terms of this, in saying that there is this one particular category, this one particular phrase that's a magical phrase that's going to explicitly state consent, and everything else is going to say not. Now, I don't mind trying to clean up the ambiguity when it comes to consent. There are just, I'm gonna get into some other stuff, but you just wonder, okay, so you have a particular situation, you don't know all of the different factors that are going into when somebody is consenting versus not consenting, whether they're going to enjoy it versus not enjoy it, how long they're going to enjoy it for, how long that consent actually lasts in that particular situation, whether during, without actually saying anything, the consent can be withdrawn. I mean, obviously, when consent is withdrawn, it's withdrawn, and it doesn't matter if you're whatever deep in there, it's withdrawn and it's supposed to end. It's done. It's over. So can that change? Like if a girl's demeanor changes in the midst of it, if she said explicitly yes at the beginning and then at some point, they change position or something and her demeanor changes, does that create a passivity that's going to be interpreted as, okay, now this is no longer consent and you've crossed the line into rape? There is a category here. There's a legal category that says that consent is the standard. It's going to be defined by X number of cases and case law and all that sort of stuff. Maybe some statutory interpretation, the history of the legislation and all that. This is taking an extra step. With consent, judges have some kind of latitude so they can figure out, okay, in the particular circumstances, even though this girl didn't say anything, you can tell by the way that she's acting that she doesn't want this. She doesn't have any interest in this, and therefore we're not going to find consent in this case. They are just stepping beyond that and saying that there's some particular magic word that has to be said. The legislator's saying this. Some particular magic word has to be said, and that's it. If the magic word is not said, then you judges don't have the latitude to take the circumstances into consideration. It's not a matter of you looking at everything, the totality of what's going on. It's, did she say the magic word or not? And of course, when it comes to just individual psychology, you can have situations where you have women who have abnormal psychological things going on at the time that they're deciding whether they want to give consent or not. They can be dissociated from their personalities. This is a phenomenon in psychology, that they could be just dissociated from whatever's going on in their body and everything else, and just not have any interest in the proceedings, but they're letting it happen for whatever case. But they could have a destructive compulsion that they're doing this now. They don't really have an interest in this, but they're trying to be destructive for a reason that has nothing to do with sex. So in this particular case, they could be indicating to somebody, they could even say yes, but not have any interest in it and not want to consent to whatever's going on. They could just be having a flare-ups of some kind of abnormal psychology. So it's really important, actually, because of the number of factors that are involved in these sorts of things, to have some kind of a latitude for judges. Here, it's taking out that latitude. Another quote says, "If she is naked, actively taking part and enjoying herself, there's obviously consent. If she's crying, inert like an inflatable doll, and clearly not enjoying herself, then there isn't," end quote. It's just that simple. It's that easy. Right there. I mean, so they put some criteria in here. Now, number one, crying, 100% on board with that. If there's crying, if there's some kind of crying going on, shut it the hell down. I'm 100% okay with that. I don't have any sympathy for any guy anywhere who, when there's some kind of indication, not even an ostensible indication, but any indication whatsoever that there's crying, shut it the hell down. That's done. But when it comes to the other stuff, if she is naked, actively taking part and enjoying herself, there's obviously consent. How the hell? Okay, so first she has to be naked, 100% naked, so she can't be partially clothed. It's not like a spontaneous thing in a bathroom or something like that. If she's completely naked. Actively taking part. So if she has a submissive fetish, then no, that doesn't fit. That doesn't work. She's not consenting. She has to be actively taking part, and she has to be enjoying herself. So interpret that however the hell you will. Enjoying to what degree? Can she just be moderately enjoying, mildly enjoying? Does she have to be really enjoying? Does she have to be audibly enjoying? What if she doesn't make a whole bunch of noise? What if she's just not grabbing on or touching or anything like that, but just laying back and taking it? Does that constitute enjoyment? But this talks about it as if it's obviously consent. This is so easy. What are you talking about? There are so many possible iterations of these kinds of circumstances, further obscured by the fact that you're not likely to have a recording, video or audio or whatever. Otherwise, nobody's going to draw the sequence of what happens. You're not going to have that stuff when you're trying to determine all this. So you've got extra distance between this, and you're trying to make it more complex and direct and specific. So if she's, like we said, crying, no, shut it down. That's done. But inert like an inflatable doll, some girls are into that. Some girls just want to take it. So now it's saying that particular activity, that interest, and you have to define that quite obviously. How often does she have to move? How often does she have to react to something or engage or whatever else to not be considered inert like an inflatable doll? And clearly not enjoying herself. Okay, what if she enjoys it at first and then it takes a turn, it's not as enjoyable as she goes down this rabbit hole. It's like, and how do you interpret that? Is it facial expression? Is it the way that her arms are moving? Is it how interested her hands are in doing something related to the sexual act? How do you determine whether she's clearly not enjoying herself or enjoying herself? It's not anywhere near that simple, and it's the kind of fascistic creep that is incredibly terrifying. So this apparently mirrors some legislation that came out in Sweden. Of course, these governments that are trying to just leapfrog this progressivism, they're doing whatever they can to try to jumpstart it, to get to the end of the race, when the realization is going to be the end of the race is we have 7 billion individual islands of people who have to each get legislation that cater to their particular beliefs, desires, and interests. But anyway, so my analysis is just some of the stuff that I've already talked about. It's concern over this fascistic creep. This is the government legislating sexual practices. I mean, the government has a distinct, important interest in trying to prevent unwanted sexual encounters. That's very important. But this is the kind of thing that it's stepping just directly into sexual intercourse in general. You have to be very careful with this kind of thing. It's like Lawrence v. Texas, when the government was very directly interested in what people were doing sexually. And it's so funny that it happens like that, where this kind of progressivism is coming right back around to being all the most horrible far-right kinds of things that it wanted to abolish, just 30 years ago or whatever else. So in this particular case, it's legislating sexual practices. It's getting the government to step in and say that this is the kind of particular sexual activity that you can do or not do. And these are the kinds of things, this is the Spain's deputy prime minister and equality minister, that she's the one who said that there's such a clear, obvious, bright line about if she's naked, actively taking part and enjoying herself. Notice it doesn't even talk about the guy. It doesn't say that there's a man side to this. It's just, it's about the woman. But if those things are happening, then yeah, it's obvious consent. If she's doing other things, then it's obviously not consent. So therefore, and it explicitly has a bright line related to saying the word yes versus not saying yes. But this is the government stepping into this area and saying, okay, well now we're going to say this is the way that you can interact when it comes to sex. And it's pushing it just a little bit farther. It's a little bit beyond consent versus non-consent. It's saying that consent has to be expressed or advertised in this particular way. And this is the kind of fascistic creep that I'm very, very concerned about. Like I said, when you have the concept of consent, did somebody agree? Were they interested in engaging in the sexual act? Now, a judge has to take everything into totality, and based on all of that information together, together decide whether it fits or doesn't fit. In this particular case, this is the legislature saying, no, we know how all of these interactions are going to go, so therefore we're going to say that 100% they have to say the word yes. If they don't say the word yes, then sorry, it's over, it's rape. That's absolutely insane. Now, I haven't even brought up, obviously there are women who could very well, or men who will likely not be believed to the same degree, but women who could very well simply engage in a sexual act without having said the word yes. If something goes wrong thereafter, then they can easily say that I didn't say yes. And then if the partner is honest and says, well, no, she didn't say yes, but she did this and this and this and was totally engaging in it and all that stuff. Well, sorry, the statute says she had to say yes. She didn't say yes, therefore you committed rape. This is the kind of thing that could easily be a vindictive method for getting back at somebody for slights that have nothing to do with sexual misconduct. So, whatever the case, this is one of those weird freaking areas because it would be great to have no ambiguity in this area whatsoever. Fine. But this isn't the way that you're going to be able to, it's a pie in the sky kind of idea that the government just knows best and knows all the iterations of the way people are going to interact, and it can figure out better just based on some lines, some provisions in a statute. It can figure out better how to deal with it. I'm absolutely sure, given that this happened as a result of demonstrations related to one case, I'm absolutely sure they didn't think one iota about the way this would affect people in general, how this would impact anybody's lives or the way that people interact or anything like that. It's just a matter of getting something out there that's going to have a short-term political benefit to the politicians. So, limitations. I know very little about Spanish criminal law. I don't know how it's applied or how judges apply it or how the language of Spanish in particular has some kind of whether it has a different function or structure or whatever else when it comes to applying laws. I don't know if it has any kind of differences there. I know very little about the particular case in question. Like I said, I don't particularly like looking up the lurid details. It's a horrible thing, and I'm hoping that obviously whatever the particular circumstances of that particular case were, that justice is done. If they engaged in misconduct, sexual misconduct, if they raped this person, then they should obviously go to jail for a very long time and suffer every ounce of punishment that they deserve for that. Now, I know very little about Spanish statistics when it comes to rape versus sexual assault, and I know very little about the ultimate ramifications of actually implementing this law and how it's going to affect individual people on a daily basis or weekly basis or whatever else. Like I said, there are 46 million people. If you take anybody who's not sexually eligible, then there's still millions and millions, tens of millions of people who this is going to affect when it's dealing with one case in one place at one time. So I have some limitations when it comes to my special knowledge. That means that anybody who's trying to espouse particular positions on this will have similar limitations. And I'm likely especially the partisan government that's trying to get this through, who's responding to demonstrations in a heated time and with a heated response. I'm sure they know very little about how this is actually going to affect anything, or they didn't take into account all of Spanish criminal law, or consider the fact that this was one case that they're responding to in a sea of cases that have all sorts of iterations. Number 2, the anchor. So the anchor, remember, this is a question about how complex this area is, so how much my confidence should be weighted when it comes to me espousing propositions. So, like I said, this is tens of millions of people with billions of interactions related to anything having to do with sex. So, this is something that it's extremely complex, and it's dealing with how this particular statute, this provision in this one statute, is going to impact all of those millions, tens of millions of people and billions of interactions. You have to be able to figure that out. You think about how that's going to impact. And it's ridiculous to think that any one person can take all of that into their brain and really consider it. So the weight, I'm giving it 1,000 pound weight. So that's pretty heavy. That's half of a ton. It's a matter of, it's one particular area, one particular band. So that's why it puts it like in the middle instead of higher. Still, it's extremely complex. So any kind of confidence in any propositions in this area, I'm going to be incredibly suspicious of them, and anybody else should be as well. So bias, potential bias, my biograph, I'm male, so I could be trying to reject this particular law because I want to protect my gender in some way, make it easier where I don't have to worry about this kind of an explicit consent. I can still engage in the exploration of determining whether a girl wants to have sex or not at any given time. So that could be some source of bias. And also my extreme suspicions of government creep. Because of the kind of work that I do, I am privy to and have to witness and engage with the inefficiency in government and the complete lack of long-term thinking and short-term solution grabbing that government does. So any kind of government creep like this, especially into the sexual mores of people, I'm extremely concerned about from the jump. It's something that could likely be a bias, that I'm very concerned about any kind of government creep, that it's a fascistic approximation, and I hate to, I'm flirting with Godwin's law right now, but it's really concerning, and that's one thing, because I've been reading, and I read a couple times now, Eichmann in Jerusalem, and I think the biggest thing that stuck out to me in that is how much of a creep that it was. It was such a gentle step here, step there, to get to the point of, oh my God, this is what we're doing? Are you kidding me? So I'm really concerned about letting the government, just thinking about Lawrence v. Texas, just thinking about the kinds of discrimination that was levied against homosexuals back in the day, and without a distinct government interest that was creating a distinct societal benefit. I'm really concerned about that. And in this particular case, like, if there are 0.0003% of interactions, sexual interactions, where one of the parties, and again, they don't even mention men, but where one of the parties just is completely passive to the point that you can't distinguish whether they're consenting or not, and none of the circumstances can illuminate that for you. It's impacting, it's trying to take care of those cases in particular. Obviously, in the vast majority of cases, people are explicit about one way or the other, even if they don't say yes, even if they don't have all three of the necessary things, being naked, actively taking part, and enjoying yourself. Even if they don't have all those explicit things, a judge looking at that can say that, okay, taking everything into consideration, there was clear consent here, there was clearly not consent here. Now we're talking about a creep that really it's not about that. And it's just stepping in. It's just that little move into something that's supposed to be so intimate and is supposed to be exploratory and exciting and all that sort of thing. But it's stepping into that and legislating it and thinking that it knows best, no matter what the possible iteration is. And that's really concerning. So like I was saying, I could have bias just generally against any kind of government creep. But anyway, so that's this particular one. So relatively weighty anchor, some potential bias, and some limitations. But I'm concerned about this kind of a law. If it does chill any kind of ambiguity, if it does illuminate any kind of ambiguity when it comes to consent versus non-consent, then great, I'll suffer it. But you have to be really careful about any more creep. And I really think that it's incredibly dangerous, and maybe the law itself has all sorts of caveats and is very careful about saying that it's not a matter of just saying literally the word yes. It's just trying to get at the point that there's a potential for somebody to be in such a state, even if I wish they would have put something related to fear or something like that. Because if somebody's in a state of stasis, or they're comatose or dumbfounded or something like that, if they've got that, I can't believe this is happening, and they're shocked, and it's something related to fear, and that's the reason that they're being passive, then if you write that into it, if there's some indicia of the fact that they're afraid, then great, yes, throw that in there. I think that's subsumed under the idea of consent anyway, but it might be something that you want to address, that it is very important that somebody could be just passive and afraid of the ramifications if they try to resist, and that's a very important category that you have to defend against. But it's this idea of, no, she has to say yes or everything else is rape. That is freaking concerning. That is really, really concerning. So that can be taken all sorts of ways, and it seems to just cut out millions of interactions that could be completely innocuous and exactly what people want to do and still be considered rape and criminal conduct. So that concerns me. But anyway, so So that's that particular idea, question, episode. And, if you want to send any hate mail to lastcoffeehouse@gmail.com, I just think it's a really important thing to think very carefully about, because a lot of the progressive areas right now, they are just diving into things that are without thinking about what the actual ramifications are going to be. They have an ideology, they're applying the ideology, and that's exactly what fascism is. That's exactly what the problem is thinking that your ideology simply knows best because you believe that your ideology is correct. And that just creates all sorts of concern on my end for many a reason. So anyway, that was that. Thank you very much for listening.